Snow crunched under boots, marking the only sound in a world that had forgotten Ivy Sterling existed. She was a ghost in her own life, an omega rejected by her pack, stripped of her rank, and left to rot in a decaying cabin on the edge of the Canadian wilderness. Her only companion was a starving, mute wolf pup she had found shivering under her porch 3 weeks ago. She shared her last scraps of venison with him, unaware that the small creature was the key to a kingdom. But when the silence of the forest was shattered by the growl of 4 matte-black SUVs and the arrival of 4 massive wolves with eyes like molten gold, Ivy realized too late. She hadn't just saved a stray. She had stolen the Alpha King's son. The wind howling through the cracks of the cabin walls sounded like a weeping woman, a sound Ivy Sterling had grown uncomfortably used to over the last 2 years. She adjusted the threadbare wool blanket around her shoulders, her breath pluming in the frigid air of the kitchen. It was barely noon, but the sky over Blackwood Ridge was a bruised purple, heavy with the promise of a storm that would bury everything. "Here," Ivy whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. She slid a chipped ceramic bowl across the floorboards. "It's not much, but it's warm." From the shadows beneath the heavy oak table, a pair of eyes, one blue, one green, blinked back at her. The pup dragged himself forward. He was a sorry sight, a ball of matted grey fur and protruding ribs. When he had first limped onto her porch 3 weeks ago, Ivy had thought he was a coyote. He had been caked in mud and dried blood, shaking so violently his teeth chattered. He didn't whine, he didn't bark. He just watched her with an intelligence that was unsettling for an animal so young. "Eat, little bit," she coaxed, sitting back on her heels. The pup sniffed the broth, rabbit bones boiled down with the last of her carrots, and began to lap it up. Ivy watched him, a familiar ache settling in her chest. She knew what it was like to be hungry. She knew what it was like to be looked at with disgust. 2 years ago, she hadn't been a hermit in the woods. She had been Ivy of the Silver Creek pack. She had been happy, or so she thought, engaged to the future alpha, Grant. The memory hit her like a physical blow. "You're an embarrassment, Ivy," Grant had said, standing in the rain while the pack watched from the porch of the pack house. "An omega who can't even shift properly. A genetic dead end. I can't have you weakening my bloodline." He hadn't just broken the engagement, he had exiled her. Miranda, a tall, statuesque she-wolf with a coat like polished mahogany, had laughed as she clung to Grant's arm. "Go find a hole to die in, runt." And she had. She had found this abandoned trapper's cabin 5 miles outside the pack boundaries, in the neutral territory no one cared about. She survived on foraging, trapping rabbits, and the sheer, stubborn refusal to die. And prove Grant right, the pup finished the broth and licked the bowl clean. He looked up at her, letting out a soft huff. "You're welcome," Ivy murmured, reaching out to scratch behind his ears. He flinched at first, then leaned into her touch. "At least one of us has a full belly." She stood up, her knees popping. "I need to get more wood. The storm is coming." Ivy grabbed her heavy canvas coat and the rusted axe by the door. As she stepped out onto the porch, the cold bit at her exposed cheeks. The forest was silent. Too silent. Usually there were squirrels chattering or birds calling. Today the woods held their breath. She walked to the woodpile, hefting a log onto the chopping block. She raised the axe, the rhythm of the work grounding her. Chop, split, stack. She was on her 4th log when the pup scrambled out of the doggy door she'd rigged up. He wasn't limping anymore. He was running, straight toward the tree line, his hackles raised. "Little bit, no!" Ivy dropped the axe and sprinted after him. "Get back here! The bears are waking up!" The pup stopped at the edge of the clearing, letting out a low, guttural growl that sounded too deep for his small chest. Then, Ivy felt it. A vibration in the ground. It wasn't a bear. She looked down the long, winding dirt track that led to the main road. Dust and snow were being kicked up into a cloud. Engines roared, powerful mechanical beasts tearing up the silence. Ivy froze. No one came here. Not the rangers, not hikers, and certainly not the Silver Creek pack. 4 vehicles burst into view. They weren't rusted pickups or rangers' jeeps. They were pristine, matte black Mercedes G-Wagons, looking terrifyingly out of place against the backdrop of wild pines. They moved in a tactical formation, aggressive and fast. Ivy's wolf, usually dormant and weak, whined in the back of her mind. Danger. Run. But she couldn't run. The pup was exposed. "Little bit inside, now!" Ivy screamed, lunging for him. She scooped the growling pup into her arms just as the convoy screeched to a halt in front of her cabin, boxing her in. The doors of the vehicles flew open in perfect synchronization. Ivy backed up until her spine hit the rough bark of a pine tree. She clutched the pup to her chest, her hand groping for the knife she kept in her boot. Men stepped out. 8 of them. They were massive. They wore tactical black gear, not military but expensive. Custom-fitted combat trousers, heavy boots, and grey thermal shirts that clung to muscles that looked carved from granite. But it wasn't their clothes that terrified her. It was their scent. Even from 20 feet away, the smell of them hit her like a tidal wave. Ozone, pine, blood, power. These weren't just wolves. They were enforcers. And then the rear door of the second vehicle opened. The air pressure in the clearing seemed to drop. The other men lowered their heads, stepping back to create a path. A man stepped out. He was taller than the others, looming over 6'4". He wore a long black wool coat over a charcoal suit, looking like he had just walked out of a boardroom in New York City rather than a forest in Canada. His hair was the color of a raven's wing, swept back from a face that was devastatingly handsome and utterly cold. But his eyes were a piercing, glowing violet. An alpha. And not just any alpha. Ivy's blood ran cold. She recognized the insignia pinned to his lapel, a silver wolf's head devouring a moon. The Valerius pack, the Royal Guard. This was Dominic Valerius, the alpha of alphas, the man who ruled the entire Western Territory. He was a myth, a monster who was said to have slaughtered his own brother to secure the throne. Ivy clutched the pup tighter. "Why is the High Alpha here?" Dominic didn't look at her. He took a step forward, sniffing the air. His gaze swept over the cabin, the woodpile, and finally landed on Ivy, or rather, on the bundle in her arms. "Give him to me," Dominic said. His voice was low, smooth, and terrified her more than Grant's shouting ever had. Ivy's heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't know why, but every instinct she had screamed that she couldn't hand the pup over. They would hurt him. They looked like death squad executioners. "I don't know what you want," Ivy stammered, her voice shaking but her chin high. "This is private property." One of the soldiers stepped forward, a snarl ripping from his throat. "Do not speak to the Alpha King like that, rogue bitch." Dominic held up a hand, silencing the soldier instantly. He took another step toward Ivy. The snow melted beneath his Italian leather boots. "I will not ask twice," Dominic said, his violet eyes locking onto hers. The weight of his alpha command crashed down on her shoulders, forcing her knees to buckle. "Hand over the wolf." The pup in her arms suddenly stopped growling. He wiggled, pushing his head out of her coat. He looked at the terrifying Alpha King, blinked his mismatched eyes, and let out a small, sharp bark. Dominic's stony expression shattered. For a split second, Ivy saw raw, bleeding agony in his eyes. "Leo," the king whispered. Ivy stood paralyzed against the tree, the freezing wind whipping her hair across her face, but she couldn't feel the cold anymore. The adrenaline coursing through her veins was molten hot. "Leo?" She looked down at the scruffy, matted creature she had been calling Little Bit, the pup she had nursed back to health with bone broth and shared body heat. Dominic Valerius, the most feared predator in the continent, fell to his knees in the slush. It was a shocking display of vulnerability that made his soldiers shift uncomfortably. "Leo," Dominic said again, his voice cracking. He held out a hand, palm up. "Come here, son." Son. The world tilted on its axis. Ivy felt the blood drain from her face. She hadn't been feeding a stray. She had been harboring the heir to the Valerius throne, the missing prince whose disappearance 6 months ago had dominated every shifter news network. Everyone thought he was dead. Kidnapped by rebels, killed by hunters. The pup, Leo, didn't run to his father. Instead, he whined and burrowed deeper into Ivy's coat, burying his wet nose in the crook of her neck. Silence descended on the clearing. It was heavy, suffocating. Dominic's eyes shifted from his son to Ivy. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating rage that made Ivy want to dig a hole and die in it. "Why?" Dominic said, rising slowly to his full height. "Does my son smell like you?" Ivy swallowed hard. "I found him," she whispered. 3 weeks ago. He was starving, freezing. I didn't know who he was." "You expect me to believe that?" The soldier who had snarled earlier stepped forward again. His name tag read, Vauclin. An Omega living in the middle of nowhere just happens to find the royal heir. She's a kidnapper, Alpha. Let me take her head. Vauclin began to shift. His bones cracked, his jaw elongating, black fur sprouting along his spine. "No!" Ivy screamed. She turned her back to them, shielding the pup with her own body. "I didn't steal him! I saved him!" "Stand down, Vauclin," Dominic ordered. The command was quiet, but struck like a whip. The soldier froze mid-shift, whimpering as he forced his body back into human form. Dominic walked toward Ivy. He moved like a predator, stalking cornered prey. He stopped inches from her. She could smell him now, rich dark chocolate, rainfall, and something metallic. It was intoxicating and terrifying. "Look at me," he commanded. Ivy forced her eyes up past the expensive suit to the face that launched 1,000 nightmares. Up close, he was even more devastating. A scar ran through his left eyebrow, giving him a jagged edge. "Give me my son," he said softly. Ivy's hands were trembling, but she slowly unwrapped her coat. She kissed the top of the pup's head. "Go on, little bit. It's okay. That's your dad." Leo looked at her, then at Dominic. Slowly, hesitantly, the pup crawled from her arms into Dominic's. As soon as Dominic held the small wolf, the tension in the Alpha's shoulders collapsed. He buried his face in the dirty, matted fur, inhaling deeply. "I thought I lost you," he murmured, oblivious to the soldiers watching. "I thought you were gone." After a long moment, Dominic pulled back. He looked at the pup's ribs, the healing scratches on his ears. Then he looked at Ivy. He didn't say thank you. He reached out, his hand wrapping around Ivy's upper arm. His grip was iron. "Secure the cabin," Dominic barked at his men. "Search for evidence, then burn it." "What?" Ivy gasped, trying to pull away. "No, that's my home. You can't—" "You're coming with us," Dominic said, dragging her toward the lead SUV. "I didn't do anything," Ivy struggled, her boots sliding in the snow. "I saved him. He would have died if it weren't for me." "That remains to be seen," Dominic said coldly, opening the back door and shoving her inside. The leather interior was warm, smelling of cedar. Until I find out exactly how a rejected Omega from the Silver Creek pack, yes, I know who you are, Ivy Sterling, ended up with my son. You are a prisoner of the Valerius pack." "I'm not a criminal," Ivy yelled as he slammed the door in her face. Through the tinted glass, she watched in horror as 2 soldiers kicked down the door of her cabin. One of them tossed a flare inside. The dry, rotting wood caught fire instantly. Ivy pressed her hand against the glass, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't much, but it was the only freedom she had. Her books, her few clothes, the little carvings she had made. Dominic got into the driver's seat. Leo, now shifted back into a small, pale boy of about 5 years old, wrapped in a blanket, was in the passenger seat. Dominic looked in the rearview mirror, his violet eyes meeting Ivy's tear-filled ones. "If you hurt him," Dominic said, his voice devoid of emotion, "if I find out you had anything to do with his taking, begging for death will be the last thing you do." The engine roared to life. As they sped away, Ivy watched the black smoke of her burning home rise into the grey sky, disappearing as they headed toward the Obsidian territory. She had saved the prince, and her reward was going to be a trial for treason. The drive took 6 hours. They crossed state lines, moved through mountain passes that weren't on any civilian map, and finally arrived at the Obsidian territory. Unlike the rustic, wooded packs Ivy was used to, the Valeria stronghold was a fortress. It was a modern city built into the side of a massive granite mountain. High walls patrolled by wolves the size of ponies surrounded a sleek, architectural marvel of glass and steel. The SUV wound its way up to the Spire, the central residence of the Alpha. Ivy was exhausted. She hadn't eaten since morning, and the adrenaline crash had left her shaking. When the car stopped, the door was jerked open by Vauclin. "Move, traitor!" He grabbed her arm roughly, pulling her out. Ivy stumbled, her legs numb. "Easy!" a deep voice rumbled. Dominic was there. He had Leo, who was sleeping soundly, cradled against his shoulder. He looked at Vauclin with narrowed eyes. "She is a prisoner, not a punching bag. Do not touch her again unless I order it." Vauclin released her instantly, bowing his head. "Yes, Alpha." Ivy rubbed her arm, looking at Dominic in surprise. He didn't look at her, turning instead to walk toward the massive double doors of the spire. "Follow," he said. Inside the spire was like a museum, marble floors, high ceilings, priceless art. But it felt cold, sterile. There were no photos on the walls, no toys, no signs of life. Servants bowed low as they passed. Dominic marched straight to the medical wing. A team of doctors in white coats was waiting. "Check the prince," Dominic ordered, laying the sleeping boy on a gurney. "Full scan. Toxicology, physical trauma, psychological eval." "And the girl?" a doctor asked, glancing at Ivy. Dominic paused. He looked at Ivy, really looked at her, for the second time that day. He saw the fraying hem of her coat, the dirt under her fingernails, the hollowness of her cheeks. She was thinner than the pup had been. "Check her too," Dominic said curtly. "If she carries diseases, I want to know before I put her in a cell." Ivy flinched. "Diseases?" "I'm clean," she snapped, finding a spark of her old anger. "Being poor isn't contagious, Alpha." Dominic's eyebrows shot up. Few people dared to speak to him like that. "We'll see." He turned to leave, but a small hand shot out and grabbed his sleeve. Leo was awake. The boy looked frantic, his eyes darting around the sterile room. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He pointed at Ivy. "He wants her to stay," the doctor observed. Dominic sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "Leo, she needs to be processed." Leo shook his head violently. He scrambled off the gurney and ran to Ivy, wrapping his arms around her legs. He glared at his father. Ivy awkwardly patted the boy's head. "I'm right here, little bit." Dominic stared at the scene. His son, who hadn't let anyone touch him in 6 months, was clinging to a rejected Omega like she was his lifeline. "Fine," Dominic growled. "She stays for the exam, but afterwards she goes to the holding cells." The exam was humiliating. Ivy was poked, prodded, and scanned. They took her blood. They checked her teeth. Through it all, Leo sat on a chair in the corner, watching like a hawk. If a doctor got too rough, Leo would growl. The results came back an hour later. Dominic returned, holding a tablet. "Well?" he asked the head doctor. "The prince is malnourished and dehydrated, but physically intact," the doctor said. "He has some healed fractures that suggest rough handling, but they are old, from before she found him." Dominic's jaw tightened. "And the girl?" "Severe malnutrition," the doctor said, lowering his voice. "Anemia, vitamin deficiency, signs of old injuries that healed poorly, likely from her previous pack, but no contagious diseases. In fact..." The doctor hesitated. "What?" Dominic demanded. "Her vitals are strange, Alpha. Her wolf is suppressed, almost dormant. It's usually a sign of extreme trauma or a seal." Dominic looked at Ivy, who was sitting on the edge of the bed, eating a sandwich a nurse had finally given her. "A seal?" Dominic asked. "Who would seal an Omega's wolf?" "I don't know," the doctor said. "But she gave the boy the majority of her food intake. Based on her blood sugar levels, she hasn't eaten a full meal in 3 days. The boy's stomach content shows venison and rabbit. She was starving herself to feed him." Dominic stared at Ivy. The anger in his chest cooled, replaced by a confused suspicion. Kidnappers didn't starve themselves for their hostages. He walked over to her. Ivy stopped chewing, watching him warily. "Why?" Dominic asked simply. Ivy swallowed. "Why what?" "Why did you feed him when you were starving? You didn't know he was a prince. To you, he was just a stray dog." Ivy looked down at her hands. "Because I know what it feels like to be thrown away," she whispered. "I know what it's like to be cold and have everyone walk past you. I couldn't do that to him." Dominic felt a strange twinge in his chest. He ignored it. "Take her to the guest wing," Dominic ordered the guards. Ivy looked up, surprised. "Guest wing, not the cells." "Leo won't sleep if you're in a cell," Dominic said dismissively. "But make no mistake, Ivy Sterling. You are under house arrest. There will be guards at your door. If you try to leave, they will stop you." As the guards escorted Ivy out, Leo tried to follow, but Dominic caught him up in his arms. "She's just down the hall, Leo," Dominic promised the squirming boy. "Daddy needs to talk to you." Once they were alone, Dominic sat on the edge of the gurney with his son. The room was quiet. "Leo," Dominic said gently, "I need you to tell me. Did she take you? Did she hurt you?" Leo shook his head vigorously. "No." "Then who did?" Dominic asked, his voice darkening. "Who took you from the playground that day?" Leo's eyes widened with fear. He raised a trembling hand and made a shape in the air, a circle with a line through it. Dominic frowned. He didn't understand. Then Leo reached for the tablet Dominic had been holding. He opened the drawing app. With clumsy fingers, he drew a picture. It was a wolf. A brown wolf. Dominic felt a chill. The Silver Creek pack, Ivy's old pack, was known for their brown wolves. Leo drew 2 stick figures. One was the brown wolf, the other... Leo hesitated. Then he drew a figure with long hair. He colored the hair red. Dominic's heart stopped. There was only one person in the inner circle of the royal court with red hair. His own sister, Lady Thorne. Leo pointed at the red-haired figure. then made a slashing motion across his throat. Dominic stared at the drawing. His sister had orchestrated the kidnapping, and she had used the Silver Creek pack to do it, which meant Ivy Sterling wasn't a villain. She was the only innocent person in a web of treason, and Dominic had just burned her house down. The guest wing was a gilded cage, the sheets were silk, the floors were heated marble, and a massive balcony overlooked the snow-capped peaks of the Obsidian Territory. Yet to Ivy, it felt no different than the drafty cabin. She was trapped. She had showered, scrubbing the soot and grime of the last 2 years from her skin. Looking in the floor-length mirror, she barely recognized herself. She was pale, her collarbones sharp enough to cut glass, her ribs visible beneath the oversized silk robe the staff had left. But her eyes, hazel-flecked with gold, were fierce. They were the eyes of a survivor. A heavy knock echoed on the door. Ivy stiffened. "Come in." The door opened and Dominic walked in. He had shed his suit jacket, his dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He looked tired. The invincible Alpha King looked like a man carrying the weight of the world. He didn't come alone. Leo was clinging to his leg like a shadow. As soon as the boy saw Ivy, he abandoned his father and sprinted across the room, burying his face in Ivy's robe. "Hey, little bit," Ivy whispered, dropping to her knees to hug him. "Did you eat?" Leo nodded, pointing to his tummy. Dominic watched them, a strange expression on his face. It was a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. He closed the door and locked it. "We need to talk," Dominic said, his voice low. "And you need to listen very carefully, Ivy Sterling, because your life depends on it." Ivy stood up, keeping a protective hand on Leo's shoulder. "You burned my house down. You kidnapped me. I'm already listening." Dominic walked over to the balcony doors, staring out at the fortress below. "I owe you an apology." Ivy blinked. Alpha Kings did not apologize, especially not to rejected Omegas. "The cabin," Dominic continued, his back to her. "I thought you were part of the cell that took him. I was rash." He turned around, his violet eyes burning. "But everything has changed. Leo told me who took him." "Who?" Ivy asked. "My sister," Dominic said, the words tasting like ash. "Lady Morgana." Ivy gasped. Morgana Valerius was the darling of the media. She was known as the Red Rose of the West, a philanthropist, a beauty. "That's impossible. She's your beta, your second in command." "She wants the throne," Dominic said grimly. "She couldn't challenge me in combat. She would lose. So she tried to break me. She hired your old pack, Silver Creek, to snatch Leo. She planned to rescue him later, play the hero, and prove I was unfit to protect my own heir." Ivy felt sick. "Grant? My ex? He was part of this?" "The brown wolf Leo drew," Dominic nodded. "Grant sold my son to my sister for a pouch of gold and a border expansion." Rage, hot and blinding, flared in Ivy's chest. Grant had rejected her for being weak, yet he was the one stealing children for profit. "Why are you telling me this?" Ivy asked. "I'm nobody. If your sister finds out I know—" "She already knows you're here," Dominic cut in. "She thinks you're just a random vagrant I picked up. But she's watching. If I send you away, she'll kill you to tie up loose ends. If I keep you in the dungeons, she'll have her spies poison you." Dominic stepped closer, entering her personal space. The scent of him, ozone and dark chocolate, made Ivy's dormant wolf stir. It was a sensation she hadn't felt in years, a scratching at the back of her mind. "So what do we do?" Ivy whispered. "We hide in plain sight," Dominic said. "Leo trusts you. You are the only person in this entire castle I know isn't working for Morgana. I am appointing you as the prince's personal governess. You will sleep in the nursery. You will eat what he eats. You will never leave his side. A human shield, Ivy said bitterly. A protector, Dominic corrected. I will pay you. I will restore your name. And when I have enough evidence to execute Morgana and burn the Silver Creek Alpha, I will set you free. Before Ivy could answer, the handle of the bedroom door rattled. Then a voice, smooth as velvet, called out, "Dominic, are you in there? I heard you brought home a guest." Dominic's eyes widened. He put a finger to his lips. "It's her. Morgana." The lock clicked. Dominic had locked it, but Morgana had a master key. The door swung open. Lady Morgana Valerius glided into the room. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with cascading red hair and eyes the color of emeralds. She wore a tailored white suit that cost more than Ivy's entire life. Her gaze swept over the room, landing on Ivy. Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes were cold, dead sharks. "Oh," Morgana purred. "So the rumors are true. You found a stray." "She saved Leo," Dominic said, his voice perfectly even. He moved slightly to block Morgana's view of his son. "Her name is Ivy." Morgana laughed, a tinkling, hollow sound. She walked toward Ivy, extending a manicured hand. "How charming. An Omega, I presume. You can smell the destitution." Ivy didn't take the hand. She looked Morgana dead in the eye. This was the woman who had hurt Leo. The fear evaporated, replaced by the protective instinct of a mother bear. "I'm the governess," Ivy said, her voice steady. Morgana's smile twitched. "Governess? But we have the best nannies in the country." She looked past Ivy to Leo. "Leo, darling, Auntie missed you so much. Come give me a hug." She lunged forward, her hands like claws reaching for the boy. Leo let out a high-pitched scream of terror. He scrambled backward, tripping over his own feet. Ivy moved before she thought. She stepped between Morgana and the boy, shoving the king's sister back. "He said no," Ivy snarled. The room went silent. Morgana stumbled back, her face twisting into a mask of fury. "You dare touch me, you filth!" "Enough!" Dominic's voice boomed. The Alpha Command slammed into the room, making the glass in the windows vibrate. Morgana froze, her wolf forced to submit to the king. "Leo is traumatized," Dominic said coldly. "He needs space. Ivy is his caretaker now. If you want to see him, you go through her." Morgana straightened her jacket, regaining her composure. She looked at Ivy with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. "Welcome to the family, Ivy," Morgana whispered, her voice laced with poison. "I hope you survive the winter." She turned and marched out, her heels clicking like gunshots on the marble. Dominic let out a breath he had been holding. He looked at Ivy with new respect. "You just shoved the most dangerous woman in the West," he said. Ivy's hands were shaking, but she crossed her arms. She scared him. Dominic looked at her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, the corner of his mouth ticked up. A smile. It transformed his face from terrifying to devastatingly handsome. "We have the Blood Moon Gala in 2 days," Dominic said. "Morgana will make her move there. And to make matters worse, I've invited the Silver Creek pack." Ivy froze. "Grant is coming here." "I need them here to trap them," Dominic said. "But don't worry, you won't be the rejected Omega in rags anymore." He reached out, his thumb grazing her jawline. The touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to Ivy's heart. "By the time the gala starts," Dominic vowed, "you will look like a queen." The ballroom of the spire was a cavern of crystal and light. Chandeliers the size of cars hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over the hundreds of guests. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, champagne, and the underlying musk of powerful wolves. Every alpha from the Western Alliance was here. Dominic stood at the top of the grand staircase, looking regal in a tuxedo of midnight blue. But his eyes kept darting to the archway where Ivy was waiting. He had sent his personal styling team to her. He had given them one instruction: make them regret it. Music swelled, a live orchestra playing a waltz. Announcing, the herald boomed, His Majesty, King Dominic Valerius, and his guest, Mistress Ivy Sterling. A hush fell over the crowd. Ivy stepped out. She was unrecognizable. The styling team had worked miracles, but the beauty was all hers. They had just polished the diamond. She wore a gown of shimmering silver silk that clung to her curves like liquid moonlight. It was backless, showing off the smooth, pale skin of her spine. Her dark hair was swept up in an intricate braid woven with sapphires. She didn't look down. She didn't cower. She walked with the grace of a woman who had survived hell and walked out the other side. Dominic offered her his arm. "Breathe," he murmured as she took it. "I've got you." "I'm terrified," Ivy whispered back, keeping a plastic smile on her face. "Everyone is staring." "Let them stare," Dominic said, pulling her close as they descended the stairs. They've never seen a miracle before. At the bottom of the stairs, the crowd parted. "Alpha Valerius!" A booming voice broke the mood. Ivy's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice. Grant. The Alpha of Silver Creek strode forward. He looked older than Ivy remembered, his face puffy, his eyes bloodshot. Beside him was Miranda, looking gaudy in a dress that was too bright and too tight. Grant stopped dead when he saw Ivy. His jaw literally dropped. "Ivy," he choked out. "Is that you?" Ivy tightened her grip on Dominic's arm, borrowing his strength. She looked at the man who had ruined her life, the man she had thought she loved. He looked small now, pathetic. "Hello, Grant," she said coolly. Miranda looked like she had swallowed a lemon. "What is this?" she hissed. "Why is the runt dressed like that? Why is she with the king?" Dominic stepped forward, shielding Ivy. His aura flared, dark and oppressive, forcing Grant and Miranda to bow their heads slightly. "Ivy is the savior of my son," Dominic announced, loud enough for the surrounding circle to hear. "She is under my personal protection. Insult her, and you insult the crown." Grant's eyes darted between Dominic and Ivy. A look of greedy calculation replaced the shock. "Savior?" "Ivy, babe, I knew you were special. I always said so, didn't I? Maybe we should talk. Catch up. You know, the engagement was never officially. I was exiled, Grant." Ivy cut him off, her voice sharp. "You told me to die in a hole. I didn't." "A misunderstanding." Grant laughed nervously, reaching out to touch her arm. Dominic caught Grant's wrist in midair. He didn't squeeze, but the threat was clear. "Do not touch her." Grant snatched his hand back, paling. "Enjoy the party." Dominic dismissed them. He steered Ivy away toward the center of the dance floor. "You did good," Dominic whispered against her ear. He placed one hand on her waist, pulling her flush against him. "He wants something," Ivy muttered, following Dominic's lead as they began to waltz. "Grant never changes. He smells power." "He's a dead man walking," Dominic promised. "But tonight, we dance." As they spun, Ivy felt a strange sensation. The heat from Dominic's hand on her waist was seeping into her skin, warming her blood. Her wolf, usually so quiet, was scratching at the mental wall, desperate to get closer to him. "Mate," her wolf whispered. Ivy stumbled. "Careful," Dominic steadied her. His violet eyes searched hers. "What is it?" "Nothing," she lied. It couldn't be. He was the Alpha King. She was a broken Omega with a sealed wolf. It was impossible. Across the room, standing by the champagne fountain, Lady Morgana watched them. Her green eyes narrowed. "She's a problem," Morgana muttered to the waiter standing beside her. "Shall I remove her?" the waiter asked. But it wasn't a waiter. It was Vauclain, the enforcer who had wanted to kill Ivy in the woods. He was loyal to the highest bidder, and Morgana paid better than the king. "Not yet," Morgana said. She pulled a small vial from her clutch. "Wait for the toast. The king always shares his cup with his guest of honor. Put this in the king's goblet." "The king?" Vauclain hesitated. "That's treason." "It's a love potion, you idiot," Morgana lied smoothly. "It will just make him pliable. I need him to sign the territory transfer over to Silver Creek tonight. If he's distracted by the girl, he won't do it." Vauclain took the vial and vanished into the crowd. An hour later, the music stopped. Dominic tapped a spoon against his crystal glass. "A toast," Dominic announced. A waiter appeared with a golden goblet on a tray. Dominic took it. "To the future of the pack, and to my son, Leo, who is safe thanks to Ivy." He raised the goblet. He turned to Ivy, smiling. "Share with me?" It was a tradition. Sharing a cup meant trust. Ivy reached for the goblet, but as the cup moved closer to her face, her nose twitched. Because of her years in the wild, Ivy's senses were sharper than any city wolf's. She knew the smell of every poisonous berry, every toxic root in the forest. Under the smell of wine, there was a faint, sweet scent, like almonds and rot. Nightshade. Dominic was bringing the cup to his lips first. "No!" Ivy screamed. She didn't think. She slapped the heavy golden goblet out of the king's hand. It flew through the air, crashing onto the marble floor. The dark red wine splashed over Miranda's dress as she stood nearby. The ballroom went deathly silent. "You crazy bitch!" Miranda shrieked, looking at her stained dress. Dominic looked at Ivy, shock and anger warring on his face. "Ivy! What are you—" "Don't touch it!" Ivy gasped, pointing at the spilled wine. On the floor, where the wine was pooling, the marble was beginning to sizzle and smoke. The crowd gasped. It wasn't wine. It was acid mixed with nightshade concentrate. Lethal within seconds. Dominic stared at the smoking floor, then at Ivy. If she hadn't slapped it away, he would be dead. "Seal the doors!" Dominic roared, his voice shaking the chandeliers. "No one leaves!" Morgana stood in the shadows, her face pale. She had told Vauclain it was a potion. She hadn't expected him to use that. Or maybe she had. "She did it!" Miranda suddenly pointed a shaking finger at Ivy. "I saw her. She put something in his cup when you weren't looking. She tried to kill the king." "Liar!" Ivy shouted. "She's a Silver Creek exile!" Grant chimed in, sensing an opportunity to save his own skin. "She's vengeful. She tried to kill you, King Dominic." The guards began to advance on Ivy. Dominic stepped in front of her, his chest heaving. He looked at Grant, then at the smoking floor, and finally at Ivy. Her eyes were wide, filled with fear. But she didn't look guilty. She looked like the girl who had starved herself to feed his son. "Alpha." Vauclain stepped out from the crowd, feigning concern. "We found this in her pocket." He held up the empty vial. He had planted it on her when he brushed past her earlier. Ivy stared at the vial. "I've never seen that before." Dominic looked at the evidence. It looked bad. It looked impossible to deny. He turned to Ivy. His face was unreadable. "Ivy." "I didn't," she whispered, tears welling up. "Dominic, please, I saved Leo. Why would I kill you?" Dominic closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, they were glowing a violent, feral purple. He turned to his guards. "Arrest her," Dominic commanded. Grant smirked. Morgana let out a soft breath of relief. "But," Dominic added, his voice dropping an octave, "take her to my private quarters. not the dungeon." "Sire?" Vauquelin asked, confused. "And arrest him?" Dominic pointed a finger straight at Vauquelin. Vauquelin froze. "Me. I smelled the almond on your hands when you walked in," Dominic growled, his fangs descending. "And I saw you drop that vial in her pocket." Dominic lunged, grabbing Vauquelin by the throat and lifting him off the ground. "Now!" Dominic roared to the terrified room. "Someone is going to tell me exactly who ordered my death, or I will paint this ballroom with all of your blood." The ballroom was a tableau of frozen violence. Dominic held Vauquelin off the ground by his throat, the enforcer's feet kicking helplessly at the air. The smell of ozone and sulfur radiated from the Alpha King, a physical weight that forced every wolf in the room to drop to their knees in submission. Every wolf except Ivy. She stood amidst the chaos, the hem of her silver dress stained with the sizzling remnants of the poison. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but her mind was strangely clear. The fear had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. "Speak!" Dominic commanded, his voice vibrating with the alpha tone that compelled absolute truth. "Who gave you the vial?" Vauquelin clawed at Dominic's hand, his face turning purple. I can't." "Speak!" Dominic roared, squeezing tighter. "Silver Creek," Vauquelin wheezed, pointing a shaking hand toward the cowering figures of Grant and Miranda. "Alpha Grant! He paid me to frame the girl and kill you!" A collective gasp ripped through the room. Grant scrambled backward, knocking over a tray of champagne flutes. "Liar! That's a lie! I never spoke to him!" Miranda was shaking, clutching Grant's arm. "Do something, Grant! They're going to kill us!" Dominic threw Vauquelin to the floor like a sack of garbage. He turned his burning violet gaze onto Grant. "Is this true?" Dominic asked, his voice deceptively soft. No, Your Majesty." Grant fell to his knees, sweating profusely. "I'm loyal. I'm a loyal subject. It's the girl. It's Ivy. She's manipulating you. She's a witch." From the shadows of the pillars, Lady Morgana watched. Her plan B, blaming the poison on Ivy, had failed. Her plan C, blaming Grant, was currently unfolding. She had paid Vauquelin to blame Grant if he was caught. Grant was expendable. As long as no one pointed the finger at her, she was safe. But she hadn't counted on Ivy. Ivy stepped forward. She looked at Grant, the man who had once promised to love her forever, now groveling on the floor and trying to frame her for murder. "He's lying," Ivy said clearly. Grant snarled at her, his fear turning into aggression. "Shut up, you weak little Omega. You don't speak to alphas." "He's lying," Ivy repeated, looking at Dominic. "But he didn't order the hit. He's too cowardly." Dominic looked at her. "How do you know?" "Because," Ivy said, turning slowly to face the pillars. "Vauquelin doesn't smell like Silver Creek. He smells like lavender and imported silk, the same scent that was in the nursery earlier today." Ivy raised a finger and pointed directly at the shadows. "Lady Morgana," Ivy stated. The room went deadly silent. Accusing the king's sister was a death sentence if you were wrong. Morgana stepped out of the shadows, clapping her hands slowly. The sound was sharp and dry. "Bravo," Morgana said, her face a mask of calm amusement. "A valiant effort to deflect, my dear." "But really? Me?" "You wanted the throne," Ivy said, her voice gaining strength. "You hired Silver Creek to kidnap Leo. When that failed, you tried to poison Dominic and frame me to get rid of the witness." "Proof?" Morgana raised an eyebrow. "Do you have a recording, a contract, or just the word of a rejected, malnourished Omega who was living in a shack?" Morgana turned to the crowd, spreading her hands. "My brother has clearly been bewitched by this creature. She is twisting his mind. "She's right," Miranda shrieked, jumping on the bandwagon. "Ivy is cursed. That's why she has no wolf. She's a demon." The crowd began to murmur. Doubt was creeping in. Ivy was a nobody. Morgana was royalty. Dominic looked torn. He believed Ivy, but he couldn't execute his own sister without concrete proof. The council would revolt. Morgana saw the hesitation. She smiled. "Guards," she ordered the room's security details, who were confused about who to follow. "Seize this woman for treason." 4 guards stepped forward. "No." Dominic stepped between them and Ivy. "Stand down." "They answer to the council too, Dominic," Morgana said coldly. "And the council laws are clear. An Omega who attacks a royal must be put down." One of the guards reached for Ivy, and then it happened. The stress, the fear, the proximity to the poison, and the sheer injustice of it all slammed into the mental wall in Ivy's mind, the seal the doctor had spoken of. It didn't just crack, it shattered. Ivy screamed. It wasn't a scream of pain, but of power. A shock wave of pure white energy blasted outward from her body. The 4 guards were thrown backward as if hit by a truck. The marble floor beneath Ivy's feet cracked in a spiderweb pattern. Dominic shielded his eyes, stumbling back. When the light faded, Ivy was gone. In her place stood a wolf. But it wasn't the small, weak wolf everyone expected from an Omega. It was massive, nearly as big as Dominic, and it was pure, blinding white. A collective gasp echoed through the hall. A white wolf. In werewolf lore, white wolves were myths. They weren't Omegas or Alphas. They were Ultimas, healers, judges, the direct descendants of the moon goddess. They were born once every 1,000 years. Grant's face went slack with horror. He had rejected an Ultima. He had treated the rarest, most powerful creature in their world like garbage. The white wolf, Ivy, snarled. The sound was like tectonic plates grinding together. She didn't look at the guards. She looked straight at Morgana. Morgana's composure finally broke. Her face went pale. "Kill it!" she screamed, her voice shrill. "Kill the beast!" But no one moved. You didn't attack a white wolf. It was sacrilege. Ivy lunged. She wasn't aiming to kill. She moved with a speed that blurred the air. She tackled Morgana, pinning the woman to the floor with one massive paw. Morgana struggled, shifting into her own red wolf, but she was pinned effortlessly. Ivy lowered her massive head, her jaws hovering over Morgana's throat. She let out a low growl. "Submit." The word wasn't spoken, but projected telepathically into the minds of everyone in the room. Morgana's red wolf whined. She tried to fight it, but the power radiating from Ivy was ancient. Slowly, agonizingly, Morgana bared her neck. She submitted. Ivy stepped back and shifted. The transition was smooth, fluid. She stood naked, but Dominic was there instantly, wrapping his tuxedo jacket around her. Ivy looked at the council members who were staring at her with awe. "Vauclin has a burner phone in his left boot," Ivy said, her voice rasping with new power. "Check it. You'll find the texts from Morgana ordering the poison." Dominic signaled his head of security. The guard ripped the boot off the unconscious Vauclin. He pulled out a slim black phone. "She's right, Your Majesty," the guard said, reading the screen. "It's all here. Use the nightshade. Make sure the girl takes the fall." Dominic turned to his sister, who had shifted back to human form and was weeping on the floor. "Morgana Valerius," Dominic said, his voice void of any brotherly love. "You are stripped of your rank. You are stripped of your name. You will rot in the obsidian dungeons until the day you die." Guards dragged the screaming woman away. Dominic turned to Grant and Miranda. Grant was on his knees, head bowed to the floor. Ivy, please, I didn't know. If I had known. If you had known I was powerful, You would have loved me, Ivy asked, pulling the jacket tighter around herself. That's not love, Grant. That's an investment. She looked at Dominic. Get them out of my sight. Take them, Dominic ordered. They will answer for their crimes of child trafficking and treason. As Grant was dragged away, screaming about how he was sorry, how he loved her, Ivy didn't even watch him go. She turned to Dominic. The adrenaline was fading. Her knees buckled. Dominic caught her, scooping her up into his arms bridal style. You're a white wolf, he whispered, staring at her in wonder. You're an Ultima. I'm just Ivy, she murmured, resting her head against his chest. I'm just tired. Sleep, Dominic commanded gently, carrying her out of the ruined ballroom. I've got you. I've always got you. The aftermath of the gala changed everything. Ivy was no longer the prisoner in the guest wing. She was the miracle in the royal suite. The supernatural world clamored for the white wolf, flooding the spire with gifts, apologies, and treaties. Ivy ignored them all. She cared only for Leo, whose voice had finally returned with his aunt's banishment. One crisp morning, Dominic found her on the balcony overlooking the snow-capped mountains. The mate bond hummed between them, undeniable now, a magnetic pull neither could resist. The council wants a coronation, Dominic said quietly, standing beside her. They want the Ultima to lead. I just want a quiet life, Ivy replied, watching the sunrise. I've had enough drama to last a lifetime. Dominic turned her to face him, his expression solemn. Then take it. If you want to leave, take Leo. Go anywhere you want. I will make it happen. Ivy searched his violet eyes. He was the king, yet he was offering her an out. You'd let me go? It would destroy me, he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. But I won't be Grant. I won't keep you for your power or your status. I want you to stay, but only if it's your choice. Why do you want me? She whispered, stepping closer. Because before the white wolf, before the gown, you were the woman who starved herself to feed my son in a freezing cabin, Dominic said, placing a warm hand over her heart. I fell in love with your kindness, Ivy. Not your rank. Tears pricked her eyes. It was the only thing she had ever wanted to hear. I don't want to leave, Ivy whispered. I want my family. Dominic pulled her close, burying his face in her neck, inhaling her scent. Be my queen, my mate. Yes, she breathed. He kissed her then, a kiss not of hunger, but of a promise kept. 3 years later, the rotting shack in the woods was gone. In its place stood a beautiful summer home made of cedar and glass. Ivy sat on the porch, one hand resting on her heavily pregnant belly. In the clearing, a 10-year-old Leo shifted into a sleek black wolf, chasing butterflies in the tall grass. Dominic stepped out, carrying 2 mugs of hot cocoa. He sat beside her, kissing her temple. He's getting fast, Dominic noted with a smile. He takes after his dad, Ivy laughed, leaning into him. And the little one? Dominic placed a large, protective hand on her stomach. Kicking like a ninja, she beamed. Dominic looked at his wife. The world knew her as Queen Ivy, the White Wolf, the most powerful Luna in history. But here, she was just Ivy. Happy? He asked. Ivy looked at the man who had burned down her prison only to build her a kingdom. Starving, she joked. But happy. As their laughter echoed through the trees, 4 black wolves watched from the tree line, no longer jailers but guardians of the pack that love built. And that is the story of how one act of kindness changed the fate of the entire werewolf world. Ivy didn't save Leo because he was a prince. She saved him because she knew the pain of being forgotten. In the end, her useless Omega status was just a shell hiding a power that could bring kings to their knees. It's a reminder that your current situation is not your final destination. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, romance, and hidden power, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What did you think of Grant's punishment? Did he deserve worse? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next episode of Alpha Tales. Until next time, keep howling.